on the phone with us, and we're honored that he was able to take time this morning at the last minute, and that is former Congressman Joe DioGuardi. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Boy, what a week. What a week.
It has been, but listen, if there's anything that's been predictable, it's what's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest problem we have in our country is predictability. We don't know what's coming. And then you have a political system that's abandoned its role as leaders. You know, if you look at the country, the people we should be trusting the most are the board of directors. Who's that? 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. These are our elected officials. You would think these are the people that we should have the most trust in, and look at the polls. We have the least trust in them.
You know, last week, you correct me if I'm wrong, they did nothing. This deal, this whatever you call this thing they did nothing. They ignored the realities of both the situation we're in and the situation we're going to continue to be in, and they did a Washington two-step smoke and mirrors misleading of the American people. They did not make any moves to solve the problem.
It all comes back to numbers. We have a lousy accounting, budget, and financial reporting system. People are throwing numbers around like drunken sailors. Even S&P admitted it made a $2 trillion error. Why should that happen? When they talk about what's really going on, some people want to use the public debt. Some people want to use the total bonded debt. Some people want to use all debt, including entitlements, over $60 trillion. When are we going to wake up and get independent auditors and bring the accounting system that we took away from New York City in 1975, the cash basis, to put them on the real accounting system called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles? We have those principles. They're like, you know, the Ten Commandments. They're in stone. There's an accounting profession. Why doesn't Congress and the United States of America adopt it? Why? Because politicians control the numbers, and their main motivation is re-election, and they want to be able to pick the numbers that favor them. Well, and we got to change the whole political system. Number one, there should be one term for president, 6 years, 4 to 6 years. There should be none of this nonsense. I become president. Let me start worrying about raising $1 billion so I can become a two-term president. Number two, House terms should be 4 years, 3 of them, total of 12 years. Senate, 2 6-year terms. We got to then get independent redistricting commissions or panels all over this country. It's time to have real representation, and it's time to take money out of the system. I mean, forget about the special interests right now, the lobbyists. That's another poison that's in the water.
But there's
We've got so many problems wrong with our system. If we don't attend to them now, we are on the path to, you know, I don't know what. At this point, no one knows what. But I predicted this in my book, Unaccountable Congress. It doesn't add up. And I quoted Secretary of the Treasury Simon, Comptroller General Chuck Bowser. This was not Joe DioGuardi, an accountant that came out of the world's largest accounting firm at that time. I quoted key people that said we cannot stay on this accounting system, this budget system, and we're still on it.
And the checks and balances that are supposedly in the system. Moody's, S&P, Goldman Sachs, none of those are checks and balances anymore. All of those organizations have been perverted and coerced and have their own motivations. The CBO, as you've said, how we even account for our money, the oversight committees, all the checks and balances have been perverted, if not completely their effectiveness eliminated.
Right. Listen, I do not blame Standard & Poor's for doing what they did. No one wants to see the full faith and credit of the United States of America demeaned. But this is a warning. This is a signal that it's going to get worse and not better. I believe it's going to get worse. And what's the answer from the media to Standard & Poor's? Attack the messenger. Mm-hmm. Oh, they had no credibility before. So why not, deal with the situation as it is now? Because the United States doesn't have any credibility. What's the answer from the White House? Attack the accounting. What's the answer from Wall Street? No confidence, and the stock markets are dropping. What's the answer from the public? The polls. We've never had such a low self-esteem or low numbers for the Congress and the president. And what's my answer? We need to change the systemic way we do things. We need to change the political structures. We need to do something to focus back on job creation, not just balancing the budget. We got to go back to infrastructure, R&D, education, all the things that China is doing now. China's not going to catch up to us next year, but over 10 or 15 years, we got a big problem with China because they are planning ahead and we're not. It's time to tell the truth. Curtis, this is not something we should be surprised about. We've had almost 40 years of running negative cash flows ever since Lyndon Baines Johnson created that mess called the unified budget to take the Social Security trust funds and net them against the rest of the deficit. We've had 40 years of borrowing from Americans and foreign governments. We had 40 years of borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund. And we've had 40 years of not promoting intergenerational equity. In other words, today we're stealing from one generation, giving to another. And finally, we've had federal pensions funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. We've had everything that could go wrong to create what happened today happening in the last 40 years. So no one should be surprised. Now, when I went before the Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Board to ask them, this was 2 years ago, I testified, why aren't you showing the liability for Social Security and Medicare on the balance sheet? Why is it a footnote for trillions of dollars? And you know what their answer was to me? Well, Congressman, the law says that if the trust funds run out of money, there's no obligation to pay, and our board has decided that's not a real liability. Tell that to the people who voted for people when they heard there was a lockbox or a trust fund. This is the nonsense going on in Washington. And why did that happen? Because the Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Board, which was formed in 1990 to try to come up with a system of generally accepted accounting principles for the federal government, because there should be some differences between the private and public sector, what they did is instead of becoming funded by independent sources, half the funding comes from the Treasury Department, a quarter comes from the Congressional Budget Office, and a quarter comes from the General Accountability Office. Guess what? These are the people who are controlled by the politicians who want good numbers. So the FASB is not giving you every year when it puts out that report the right numbers, the way we need for General Motors and all these other big corporations for the SEC. The public has to wake up. But the problem is we've got too many numbers. We need a place that we can trust, and I've been calling for this. Just like the Fed is an independent branch of, or agency of the government to make sure that interest rates are set independently and the money supply, why don't we have an independent body when it comes to budgeting, accounting, and financial reporting? That doesn't mean you take away appropriations from senators and House members. They're elected to allocate money. But let's have professionals tell us where we are and where we're going based on the system that's been in place for decades.
Tell us the truth is what you're saying.
Well, it's the truth.
Tell us the truth.
I hate my foundation when I left Congress, truth in government. It's like truth in advertising. Mm-hmm. Why should I buy something if you're going to tell me it's this, and when I pick it up, it doesn't work? And it's the same thing with politicians. I vote for them, and I find out that what they said is not coming out. It's not working. So it's truth in government. Truth is a great word. Everybody needs the truth.
Congressman, I've got to go. I've got to go to a hard break, and I know we're going to continue this discussion in the coming weeks. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope, again, you'll have the time for us in the coming weeks, coming days, so that we can get your unique perspective. I'm Curtis Wright, and thank you to former Congressman Joe DioGuardi.